Hi everyone. Today I decided that I'm going to spend some time doing the pivot tables that some of you had asked me to do. But before I start by making the pivot table getting to the pivot table, I will make that video in a separate part. But I wanted to show you how to prepare your data for the pivot table. Usually you are, if you're used to working with this stuff, you will already have your data given to you. And there are certain things that you always have to be careful about before you start building the pivot table. And those are: start your data table in cell A1, which is this point right here. Make sure that all the columns have a clear header. And ideally, these headers should be unique. So if this says personal, then don't call this personal as well. Call it personal too if you have to, okay? Avoid blank cells. Notice that in this little data table that I have, there are no blank cells. If there are blank cells, you can always use the find and select option and replace blank cells with something meaningful. It's also a good way to check if blank cells have been left because of an error or an omission. So you want to maintain the integrity of the data. Also, if there are any totals or subtotals, like if this column here was a total of everything column, remove that column because the pivot table does that for you. And so you don't want it to count that particular row if that is the total row at the end here. For instance, if there was a total row here with the additions of some of these things, that you want to remove that before you proceed. I also wanted to say, this is something that is not given in this source, but something that I've learned with experience. Make sure you go through the data and ensure that it is in the right format. This is a date. It should be in the date format so that when you create a pivot table, it recognizes it as a date and not as a number. Same thing with any places where there are numbers. You should try to see if you can format them clearly to indicate that they are numbers. Now, this data, as you can see, every time I click on something and hit enter, the whole table's changing. This is the dynamic function in Excel that I used to create this data set because I didn't have a data set that I could use and share with everybody. But I thought that while I was showing how to, clean up data, I could also show you how to create data so that you can play around with stuff. So I decided to go with name, product, date. So this is like a fake sheet of purchases made on different cards between the months of January and March of 2020. And I used myself, Lynn, Devansh, and Samvit as the name of the people who are purchasing. For products, I wanted to have options of technology, house-related stuff, school-related stuff, or toys. And some of those purchases may be personal, some of them might not be personal. So again, I just made this up, but I wanted to show you how to enter it into Excel if you wanted to create your own data set. So these are randoms. Excel has a function called choose, and if you notice, it gives you the option of choosing different values. And I have 4 values, right? So I use a second function, which is called a rand between, which is a random number between 1 and 4 will be selected, where 1 represents Kruti, Lynn is represented by 2, Devansh is represented by 3, and Samvit is represented by 4. Now, once I enter that, I can copy that down using the copy down function. And I want 40 observations. So again, it just randomly selects a number or a person between, Kruti, Lynn, Devansh, and Samvit and assigns it. Again, for the product, I went with the choose rand between 1 and 4 and chose the 4 categories of school-related, house-related, toys, and technology. If I wanted to remove the option of toys, I would now have only 3 categories, and so my rand between should be 1 and 3. Okay. For date, you can put a random date. So rand between allows you to do the lower date, which is 1st of January 2020. The format, as you can see here, is year, month, and day. Again, that's the lower date, and the upper date is, again, year, month, and day. By assigning that and copying it down, it will basically pick a random date between 1st of January 2020 and 31st of March 2020. Again, here we have 2 choices. Is it personal or not? Yes or no. So 1 and 2. So you can choose, you could also use an if formula for this, but it would be unnecessarily complicated. Again, the amount spent, I just picked a random number between 1 and 150 and applied it. Bank, again, I use the choose rand between, and then options are MasterCard, Visa, and bank. And the month is derived from the date. So what we want to do is to use this function, which basically allows you to say, out of this particular column, in this case it is C2, pick the month, right? And so I'm writing it as MMM because I don't want it in numerical form. I want it to read January, February. So MMM represents 3 letter representation of the month of the purchase. Now, as you can see, this data set is dynamic. So before you use it to create pivot tables, it would be essential to, once you have it ready, you hit Control C, which will copy the data, and then you go over and create a new sheet. And I've already created one, but just because we are working on this together, you can click any column, go back because I deleted that, the copy function disappears. So you have to copy it and then paste it right away. So remember, we don't want to paste it in the form of the dynamic form that we had on the first one. We want it in static form. So go to paste, and if you look at paste values, you will see the option of paste values and number formatting. You can use either one of them. And once you do that, you will see that now these numbers are steady. They are no longer dynamic. The formulas have all disappeared. Also double check, there are no blank spaces in this, and this is now ready to create a pivot table out of. So always have to make a decision when you're creating pivot tables and you have ready-made data. It is always one of those things which comes with experience, but is it worth your time to clean up the data? Or if you have a source for the data, can you request a cleaned up version of the data? Sometimes people try, when clients send you data, they try to be very helpful. And the downside of that is that they might enter and put in rows and columns with totals in them already given to you instead of the raw data. And Excel works beautifully with raw data. So always try to get raw data if you can, because aggregations means things get lost. So again, one of those things where you need to decide whether it is worth your time to actually clean up the data to make it usable for your pivot table, or is it better to reach out to them and be like, hey, I need you to resend me the raw data and this is the format I need. So again, it depends on the project you're working on. I'm going to end this video for now, and then I'll have a pivot table, how to create pivot tables and how to play around with pivot tables in a separate video. So hang on.